Hello everyone. So I wanted to do a video covering Ilhan Omar and the controversy, if you will, around her comments that people have been making hay about and kind of, I'm not sure what the correct word for this is, but just, unnecessarily so, and totally in bad faith in my view. But before we get to that, just two quick updates. So Beto O'Rourke, he officially announced his campaign for president on March 14th, and it looks like, to me at least, like he's trying to brand himself as more of a progressive, just in terms of the rhetoric. Because I mean, he's not running on his record. Like I already know he's not running on his record because his record is going to be basically Republican light if you look at it. Um, and kind of similar to Kamala Harris. She said she was proud of her record when she announced, but didn't really go into much detail because that would have been bad for her basically. So Beto O'Rourke, I think he's gonna pretty much pull the same trick, and he talks in a way that's very verbose, very eloquent sounding. It is a little bit like much though. Like the dude is just it's like he talks and like every word is emphasized. Every sentence has 11 out of 10 conviction in it. It's like just like he's pouring from the heart, and it's just like, I don't know, it's just too much. It's overwhelming. Like when you have that much emotion behind his words, and his words don't even hold that much weight. They're mostly just kind of cliches that we all hear all the time. But I think that's him kind of trying to rebrand himself. He doesn't consider himself a democratic socialist. He did say that out in public. But he's he's putting his no corporate PAC money front and center to try and tell everyone, oh, I'm not corrupt. But that's a little bit questionable. We know he takes money from the oil industry, and yes, he lives in Texas. He represented Texas. They're an oil state, but it's not. It has nothing to really do with taking the money from the employees. Like on one level, yeah, you're more responsive. You feel more obligated to cater to that industry's needs if you take the employees' money, but I give it a pass just because it's normal everyday people. But he's taking money from executives as well, and I don't like the precedent that that's gonna set. I don't trust him on any issue really. I mean, money in politics. He hardly. I didn't see much of a mention of that in the videos I saw of him. Not specifically that, from what I can remember. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he said it in passing. But he has to put that front and center, and I guess he's doing it in a disingenuous way. In my view, the record is what counts. His record is not good, and so any kind of attempts to rebrand himself are just not really that. They don't interest me, and I hope that people will be able to see through that. But I think certain people are falling for this ruse, and they're looking at this guy like he thinks. I know that he thinks he's a white Obama just because of the way he talks. It's so staged and planned. It really is like a remnant of the older style politics, like in the '90s and leading up to Obama, because like Obama was able to do that kind of charismatic, like typical politician speak very well. He was able to do that because he's charismatic, and he's very good at putting words together that when you really dissect it with Obama, they may not necessarily mean anything, but it feels like he's talking to a specific policy. But regardless, I think it's quite problematic. But at the same time, not, because I want more centrists to run. I want more centrists to split the vote, and that'll help Bernie more. But Yeah, so he's in the race. I think he's more or less just annoying to be dealing with, honestly. That's all. So, the other thing is the House and the Senate passed resolutions to block Trump's declaration of a national emergency. Trump issued his first veto ever. Um, as it stands now, there are not enough votes to override a veto. The vote is supposed to be on March 26th in the House, and I would urge anyone, especially if your representative is a Republican, to call them up and pressure them to vote to override the veto. It's going to be very tough, but we gotta put all the effort into doing this as possible. First of all, let me just say, I just want to say quickly that I'm surprised actually that, the House is Democratic right now, so that doesn't necessarily surprise me. But the Senate also voted to block Trump's declaration of national emergency. I believe it was 11 Republicans voted against Trump here, including Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, the state I live in. And he's someone who I normally do not like at all. And he ended up doing the right thing in this instance. Putting aside the policy of the wall, because I've talked about that many times, the important takeaway for me is the authoritarian nature of this whole dynamic now that's in place. Because we're supposed to have a system of checks and balances, and this is technically, I guess, it's working the way it's supposed to on paper, because there's 2/3 majority that has to override a veto. It's a pretty high threshold, and if you don't reach that, then Trump gets his way. But we elect people to Congress to represent us, just as the president is supposed to represent us in theory. Trump didn't win the popular vote, but this move is anti-democracy in nature to me. Take into account that more Americans oppose the wall than support it. It's 58 to 48%. 58, obviously, they don't support the wall. This is it's like just a hiccup rule change that is, it is part of our system. This is kind of how it functions. But when people get super tied into the traditions that we've had in our country, in an instance like this where it fails us, I think it's time to start questioning how we run our system, and we should consider moving towards something that's more democratic, more in line with what the people want, more responsive to what the people want. And so Congress did its duty in this instance, but just because of the way the system is set up, it's not going to be good enough. We'll see if they can override the veto. It'll be really hard to do that. But that was the update on that. So let's go to Ilhan Omar. So she made some comments that people said were anti-Semitic. A lot of these criticisms, in my view, are in bad faith. And somewhat as far as to say that just criticizing the Israeli government is itself anti-Semitic. And it was a Congress person who said that. They said questioning or criticizing is unacceptable, the relationship between Israel and America. So, let's just speak to that real quick. That is, you're vowing unconditional support to a country, and we could go through the list of what Israel has done in terms of killing innocent civilians, breaking international law with the settlements. It just seems to me, if there was another country that was guilty of the same things that Israel was doing, we wouldn't be having this conversation, and it'd be like, oh, they're a rogue nation. But they happen to be our ally, Israel, so, anything goes. And, the power of the lobbying and money in politics is what she's talking about. But let's get into that. I don't want to jump ahead too much. So they had a resolution in the House. It was viewed as a rebuke to Ilhan's comments. It was originally going to have her name in it. Instead, the resolution became more generalized. It was just a generalized condemnation of bigotry across the board. Many Democrats, including Nancy Pelosi, are going after her, however, because of this. Bernie did voice his support for Ilhan. AOC, she did a little bit to help Ilhan. I didn't like her framing in her defense because her line of attack was basically like, why isn't the GOP calling out anti-Semitism in its own party? It doesn't actually address whether Ilhan is being anti-Semitic or not. So I think leaving that open is a little bit problematic. We have to be focusing on the fact that this is a smear. This is not in good faith, and we could break down the reasons why it's a silly debate, really, because what the right is doing is they're deflecting from policy. But I'm jumping ahead again. It's worth pointing out, I guess, for AOC, worth pointing out that the GOP doesn't call out anti-Semitism in its own party, really, or the rise of hate groups in this country now. It's worth pointing that out, but I think it's a separate point from the Ilhan thing. Meanwhile, in West Virginia, they put up a clearly bigoted poster of Ilhan Omar in the state legislature. I was really just mad about it, seeing the poster, but then when I found out it was in the state legislature, that is a whole nother level. So what the poster was a picture of 9/11 at the top, with one of the towers exploding, and the text said, "Never forget," in quotes, "you said ... Then below is a picture of Ilhan Omar, and the text there says, "I am the proof you have forgotten." So that's clearly bigoted. That's clearly like to act like Ilhan Omar, who's from Somalia, has anything to do with 9/11 when she was, I don't know how old when it happened. Like this is ridiculous. And it's just bigoted. You're clearly showing that you just don't. When it comes to Muslims, you have this special, equation in your mind where it's like, oh, they can't be trusted because they have this dual loyalty. Except then you'll accuse her of saying Jews have dual loyalty, even though that's not what she said. Jumping ahead once again, but Fox News was all over this. Janine Pirro, Judge Janine Pirro, excuse me, said that Ilhan wears a hijab, and that's against the Constitution because that's Sharia. I believe she said it was antithetical to the Constitution, and then she backtracked and all that. But that's, look at the segment, and you can see quite clearly the implications in what she's saying there. And let me just address the Sharia law point real quick. Sharia law, in terms of the Islamic religion, Sharia law can kind of be more broad. Like, Sharia law more or less just means living your life in accordance to Islam, and the interpretation of that can vary depending on what doctrine or whatever type of Islam. I feel like I'm not saying the right word there, but you know what I'm saying. Like, there's variations of Islam, and that's when you live in accordance to that, according to your own interpretation. That's Sharia law. But in politics, when people say Sharia law, they're referring to the most extreme version of that, like Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia and ISIS, I guess. But we're allies with Saudi Arabia, so kind of hypocritical. But so I think that point is just trotted out in a very bigoted and ignorant way. Ilhan is obviously secular. She's not trying to force, theocracy on America. That's not what her plan is, and it's just kind of ridiculous to think that that would even be in the cards. And then I wanted to bring up Tucker Carlson. He made a cartoon graphic for his show that made Brian Stelter of CNN look like a puppet for Mark Zucker, who's the CEO of CNN. And this came up because Tucker was facing scrutiny for his comments they made in the past, but I wanted to bring this up because that's casually evoking this anti-Semitic trope, this like Jews are the puppet of the media. There's no other interpretation, and there's no issue or policy linked to why he did this. I mean, it would be wrong regardless, but even granting the most conspiratorial version of events, like CNN is colluding with whoever to go after Tucker Carlson. Like, there's no need to evoke this imagery that is clearly anti-Semitic, and then they turn around and say Ilhan is bad because she's saying stuff that's actually linked to policy. So let's cover what she said. So this all started because she tweeted out she tweeted out some things that were like people were saying. I forgot exactly how the context arose, to be honest, but basically she's addressing the power of lobbying in this country with AIPAC, and she tweeted all about the Benjamin's baby, basically in response to why do people sell out to AIPAC. This is a critique of money in politics. She's talking about the influencing power that lobbyists have. And look, you can go on their website. They have a special congressional club at AIPAC where you join by donating X amount of money to a person running for Congress, and I'm pretty sure it even says on the website, like, it has to be like under the pretense of like your support for Israel. So that is clear influence over our political system, and people need to start talking about this. People need to start thinking of this as a problem, because if you want to talk about Russian interference, if you want to talk about that, some memes that were being shared on Facebook, I think this is much more important, to be honest, than to be talking about Russia. This is pervasive in our system, and we see the result of that. Then she said, Israel hypnotized the world. I don't know the exact quote, but so the wording of that could have been better. I've learned that is a anti-Semitic trope, like this idea, like Jews hypnotizing, tricking people into things. But honestly, look, Ilhan is a Somali refugee who English is not her first language. I've lived in this country my whole life. I've known, Jews my whole life, pretty much, yeah. I didn't know of that specific trope. And unless someone showed me the association with that specific wording with anti-Semitic rhetoric, I wouldn't have known that. I'm talking about specifically like hypnotizing and tricking people. Like, it makes sense. It's something like hearing it. Yeah, that makes sense to me. But like, to think I would have known that just offhand, I don't think I would have known that. So people might say she should have known better. Excuse me. But the thing that bugs me is that people don't actually address the points that she's making. They just don't address them. She tweeted this in 2012, and she was talking about Israeli killings of innocent Palestinians, which was beginning to surge. If you look at the data, there was beginning to be a surge in Palestinian deaths in 2012, but it got even worse in 2014. So she did apologize for the wording. She said that was raised to her attention that the wording was kind of reminiscent of a trope. So she apologized for that, but she stood by her criticisms, which I'm glad she did. But people they don't address the issue. It's all about deflecting from policy, because I think what they're doing is they see an opportunity to drag her down, and she has a position of power. She's on the House of Foreign Affairs Foreign Affairs Committee. Wow, I can't speak today. And she questioned Elliot Abrams, who's the special envoy to Venezuela. She questioned him really hard, and that was exactly what was needed. This guy is guilty of a lot of things, and we'll get into that. But they're afraid. The right is afraid of the power that a lot of these new freshman congressmen have to move the debate, and that's why they don't want to talk about the debate. That they don't want to address the Israel-Palestine issue or the issue of AIPAC influencing our politicians. That they don't want to talk about that because they want to keep it the same. And I would recommend everyone check out this segment on I-24 News. Michael Brooks went up against a right-wing buffoon on there, and they discussed this issue, and Michael Brooks just pummeled him to no end. I mean, policy after policy, and not even that. Like, he just framed it in a way that was so perfect and truthful. I mean, like, it's down to earth. And what people on the right do is they trick you into thinking like they're the edgy ones, or like they're the ones that really know what's going on, when really what they're doing is just reading far into what she's saying and jumping to conclusions. Like, I saw a Fox News segment that they were saying Ilhan said to defund the DHS completely or something, when the text or the tweet, I wouldn't necessarily consider it that. Like, she's talking about the wall. She's talking about not funding the wall. And granted, maybe she should have been more specific in her wording of it, but, I mean, it takes 2 seconds to figure this out. Like, I think they just take the opportunity. People on the right. That's what it is. And so, in conclusion with that, I would say, like, Ilhan should be doing a little bit of a better job, like, not leaving those openings. They're going to do them anyways, so maybe it's not even worth saying that, because they're going to attack her. But I would make it hard, like, much harder for them going forward. So she was accused of saying Jews have a dual loyalty, which is a gross mischaracterization of what she said. And if you want to go and look at the whole quote, it's a kind of a long quote, that's why I didn't put it in. But this is her quote. So for me, I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it's okay to push for allegiance to a foreign country. And I want to be clear here. Like, we're not talking about diplomacy. Diplomacy is, it usually comes up when you have a problem with a country and you're trying to figure out how to resolve it. It may not be like a military conflict or something like that, but you have some kind of issue you want resolved. What we're talking about here, when it comes to AIPAC and Israel, is this unconditional support, like I was saying, and it's too pervasive in our government now, in both parties. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's going to speak at AIPAC this year, and we have a terrible right-wing government in Israel right now. The whole kind of purpose of AIPAC is to kind of have this synchronicity with America and Israel, and now we have our own far-right leader in this country. She's talking about money and politics. I mean, it's practically like in the quote itself. To think of this in another context, like if there was a equivalent to AIPAC for Saudi Arabia, do you think that people would just be okay with lobbyists pushing policies that would be favorable to Saudi Arabia in Congress at a massive grand scale? I don't think people would like that. But what happens is, because you flip who's doing it. Now it's Jews instead of Muslims. Maybe that could be why. Honestly, I don't know. I know there's a lot of anti-Muslim bigotry in this country. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in this country too. But I think actually more what it stems from is just Israel is viewed as our ally, so anything that our allies do is fine. Because I mean, like I said, we're allies with Saudi Arabia, and they do barbaric things. But at the same time, I don't think there's a big lobbying effort like with AIPAC. There's an understanding with Saudi Arabia that they do bad things, but it's not there with Israel yet. It's wildly authoritarian to be talking about trying to scrutinize Ilhan Omar. That's what this resolution was going to be about. It ended up just missing that. And it was going to have her name in it, the resolution, Ilhan Omar's name. But I want to talk about the implications with legislation that exists now is that you pledge support to Israel with these anti-BDS bills, and it's states have passed this. I believe Pennsylvania has passed one. This forces you to sign a pledge that you will not take part in the political protest in that specific one, BDS, for Israel, if you're a government contractor. I saw, I believe it was Arkansas, one of the state legislators said, well, basically, we're not going after your free speech rights. We're just, we're saying the government won't do business with you. Well, you know what? We're talking about here the government targeting specific political speech. Let's put aside what's actually being done in terms of you're not going to do business with them. The government is making a specific effort to go after people that have a specific political view, and that is problematic to me. And unconstitutional in my view. So in closing with the Israel thing, lobbying and money in politics is problematic across the board. It doesn't matter whether it's Israel, whether it's fossil fuels, could be tech companies. You have to view it through a very problematic lens, because you have to understand that what happens is lobbyists pay our politicians or corporations through campaign donations, and oftentimes they vote in a way that's favorable to these industries or these countries. So you got to question the motives. If you want to talk about the other side, what about the lobbying power of climate activists? Well, they don't have as much sway. They don't have as much money. So the money is ultimately what it comes down to. The most money you have pretty much is when you'll get the most influence. But if so let's say the climate lobby was huge and they were going after our politicians. Well, I agree on the policy, we need to be doing something about climate change, but I would kind of, this is a hypothetical here, but I would be just concerned about money no matter where it comes from, because it could be the case with the climate activists. Maybe there's shadiness, there's kind of an implication we'll say that we're for uh, renewables, green energy, whatnot, and behind the scenes, what we're actually not going to change that much. Maybe it's more like continuity on the inside. So I worry about money no matter where it comes from. Honestly, I want it to be. I want the system to be responsive to what the people want. I believe in democracy. I don't know. I don't know about direct democracy. I want to go more in that direction, basically. So I don't know if I would say complete direct democracy, but I want to go more in that direction. So a few quick things. Ilhan also made comments on Obama, which got some scrutiny, which are really not that controversial. Basically, in a nutshell, she said Obama was a pretty face over bad policies, and then to differentiate, said Trump was not as polished. And like so, the implication is like a lot of the people before Trump had bad policies, but they were more polished. That seems completely reasonable to me. And people went after her, of course. And Ilhan kind of backtracked a little bit, which I wish people on the left, I know the, I don't know if it's an urge or just like a commonality, whatever you might call it in today's world, to like post in these kind of witty, short ways. Like on Twitter, you only have a certain amount of characters to post in. But for one thing, I wish there was more specificity, and I wish they would stay stronger and not backtrack as much. And when they do so, it's not in a way that I consider very problematic or something like that. Like it's usually over things that aren't that important, but I wish they wouldn't backtrack at all. Like in a case like this, you don't have to. Like Obama had a lot of bad policies, and when we're going to talk about Venezuela in a minute, like he was starting that. Obviously Trump made it worse, but I think it's bad to be having this conversation in this way where it's like, oh yeah, Obama started a lot of these bad policies that Trump did, but Trump did it way worse, so let's talk about Trump. I think we need to talk about both. Excuse me. We need to talk about the fact that the Democrats, the current iteration of them, the centrists, laid the groundwork, I think, for someone like Trump because of the complacency, because of the lack of trying to change the system. And I'm sure Obama would try to say that he tried to change the way politics works, like money in politics. But I wholeheartedly disagree with that, because if you look at the fact that he went on like every talk show you could think of, and he goes on there to talk about nonsense stuff, talks about like reading Bible quotes on his BlackBerry. He should be on these platforms to hammer away on money in politics, to hammer away on whole kinds of issues that people need to get behind. But he didn't. He used it, I think, more for self-aggrandizement, for trying to, soften his personality. I think there was a fear that because of the racism surrounding Obama, the people's perception of him, obviously, they wanted to make him look more human, I guess. I don't know if it was that conscious, to be honest, but that's what I perceive it as. Like, they wanted to make Obama, and maybe it wasn't for that reason, for like the racists out there, I don't know, because like at the same time, like, you're not going to convince them, but I think there was an effort to make him seem more relatable. So regardless, so let's jump to Venezuela now. I think I had talked about Venezuela a few times before, but I wanted to go more in detail now because I did some more research. So Trump had picked Elliot Abrams as special envoy, and he has an extremely worrisome past. I mean, he was pardoned for Iran-Contra, and he has a history of interference in Latin America and basically getting weapons to these right-wing militias to overthrow governments in Latin America, because at the time we were still in the Cold War and we can't have communism spread to our hemisphere. So we have to have control over what's going on in Latin America. And, there was genocidal stuff happening. Women and children were being slaughtered. And Elliot Abrams praised these actions in this country as great moments. Like he's saying the fact that, I don't know, like we have dominance in the region. And of course, he would deny like the genocide and all that, but like this is documented fact. Like this is what war criminals do. They just completely lie about the reality, and somehow get away with it. I don't know how, but they do. And so aid is being politicized. In this country, in U.S. media, all you hear about when it comes to Venezuela is, oh my God, they're not accepting aid. Why isn't the aid crossing the bridge and all that? Well, they're accepting aid from the international community. And the international community and the Red Cross came out and condemned U.S. actions because Venezuela, it's like, I don't know if catch-22 is the right phrase for this, but just like it's so obvious that this is a ploy. Like when Trump tweets out, I don't recognize Maduro as the president anymore, Guaidó is the president, that sends a signal to Venezuela that we shouldn't trust you. And likely that you're trying to like overthrow the government of Venezuela. So obviously they're not going to let the aid through if given all the context. Like we're acting like this is in a vacuum and like we never did anything wrong to Venezuela. Like, no, quite the opposite. We waged economic warfare on them. We crippled them with sanctions and we freeze their assets. Citgo is a Venezuelan company, but it operates in the U.S. And we froze $7 billion in assets and $11 billion in oil exports. And then Mike Pompeo has the audacity to come out and say, well, Cuba is the true imperialist power in Venezuela. That is a gross lie. A gross lie. Because Citgo is not the only example of this. There's other companies, other banks, I believe, that their assets are frozen. So when you do that to a country, you're crippling them, and we know that. But then we turn around and say, oh, it was socialism that did this to them. This is problematic. And to bring it back to Ilhan Omar, she said, when asked if she would recognize Guaidó as the president, she said, hell no. And that's exactly the right response. Because, look, we're going to recognize him because Trump tweeted it? Like what is wrong with the world? I bet a lot of Democrats, too, are not, like they're okay with this. I remember I saw a video where they were asking Democrats and they were kind of like passé on it. Like this is ridiculous to act like we want to talk about Russian interference and we're talking about canceling in cancel culture here, canceling Maduro government and then just declaring our own leader here. Like this is authoritarian and imperialist beyond imagination. I guess not beyond imagination because it's part of our history. This is part of what we do with the CIA, Black Ops. Like this is stuff that happens. It sounds conspiratorial, but like I just said, Elliot Abrams was involved in something. That was back during the Reagan administration. These acts of aggression are common for the U.S., and I wish people would be more skeptical of what they see and hear, and that they would read into things and question things more. A UN investigator went there to determine if there's a humanitarian crisis, and he said no, actually, but to the degree that there is, it's because of the U.S. It's because of our economic warfare against them. So that's very problematic, and I would like to see an end to that. Unfortunately, it's not going to be in the near future, I think.